So listen up, folks, back on the mic. And today the internet has served up a plate so wild I had to check the date on my phone 3 separate times. Because Drake, the same Drake who spent the last 3 years telling every microphone within arm's reach that he is the biggest artist on planet Earth, is now, allegedly, suing the very man who handed him the keys to the kingdom. And I do mean literally the man who put a pin in Drake's hand back before Drake was Drake. The manager known simply as hip-hop, a name that carries so much weight in this industry it may as well be etched into a plaque outside the Rockefeller front door, has stepped in front of the camera and calmly explained that the boy from Toronto, the same Toronto loyalist golden child, quietly filed paperwork blaming him for the deal that started the whole Drake empire. And family, if that sentence doesn't make your jaw physically detach from your skull, buckle in, because I am about to walk you through the wildest week Drake has ever endured, and I promise you the receipts are heavier than anything OVO's PR machine will ever be able to spin. Now before we crank the temperature up, let's establish something very simple and very quickly. For someone who is supposedly ancient, washed, retired, cooked, buried, boxed up, or otherwise irrelevant, Jay-Z sure does live rent-free in the mouths of every single Drake apologist on the platform. Every time Jay-Z breathes near a stadium, the entire OVO faithful comes unglued. Every time an anniversary tour is announced, the timeline melts. Every time HOV puts on his sunglasses, a certain segment of the internet enters what I can only describe as a full spiritual crisis. And I already know they are going to short-circuit again the second I tell them I have front-row tickets to the Jay-Z Los Angeles show. And yes, I am absolutely covering that concert for you. So drop a comment below if you want the full breakdown when it drops. The claim in that community is that Jay-Z only scheduled the show because it lands on Drake's birthday, which is, and I cannot stress this enough, one of the most absurd storylines I have seen manufactured in a very long time. Jay-Z is on the tail end of one of the most historically celebrated album anniversaries in rap. Every arena is packed. Every promoter is calling. But sure, this is a birthday attack on a man who is currently in a legal war with his own manager. Let's keep it moving, because it only gets worse for Drake from here. Because here is what actually happened, and I want you to hear this in plain English before the misinformation machine gets to it. Kayambo Hip-Hop Joshua, a legendary architect behind Rockefeller Records, a man who has managed Lil Wayne, Kanye West, Nicki Minaj, and yes, our friend Aubrey Graham himself, sat down for a long-form interview and casually dropped one of the most damaging pieces of context Drake's legal team could possibly hear. Hip-Hop.SED Drake, at some point, filed a claim against him for the crime of, and I quote, letting him sign the deal he signed. Let that sink in for a second. The man who ushered Drake into the industry, who introduced him to the machinery that turned a Canadian teen actor into a billion-stream global phenomenon, is now being blamed by that same teen actor for the paperwork that made all of it possible. This is textbook Drake behavior at this point. And if you are shocked, I genuinely need you to catch up, because the receipts stretch all the way back to 2005. Let's slow down and unpack how absurd this actually is. Everybody's first deal in the music industry is trash. I don't mean bad. I don't mean unfavorable. I mean sub-basement, subterranean, chained to the anchor trash. And do you know why? Because when you sign your first deal, you have zero leverage. Zero. You are trading ownership for infrastructure. You are handing over percentages in exchange for the machine that will manufacture your fame. Nobody is forcing you into that chair. Nobody is holding a pin to your neck. You walk in. You read the contract, or you don't read the contract, and either way, you sign, because the alternative is going back to whatever 9-to-5 was suffocating your dream. So when Drake, who was actively hunting a rap career while confined to a wheelchair on a teen soap opera, sat down with hip-hop and agreed to the split, Drake knew what he was doing. Or if he didn't, that is a failure of Drake's own due diligence, not a crime committed by a manager doing his job. And this is where the pie chart, or what I like to call the carved-up check, becomes so hilarious it borders on satire. According to what hip-hop laid out, Drake's original earnings were divided between at least 5 parties before Drake even dropped his first studio album. Jay Prince, one of the most feared names in Southern rap history, took a slice. Lil Wayne, the mentor who literally gave Drake his platform, took a slice. Birdman, whose relationship with the Cash Money empire is its own separate documentary, took a slice. Cortez, another heavyweight manager, took a slice. Hip-hop himself took a modest cut. And then the label conglomerate above all of them, Universal Music Group, took the biggest slice of all. Now here is the punchline, and I want the Toronto loyalists to pay close attention. Every single one of those people helped construct the machine that made Drake the biggest streamer in modern rap history. You cannot claim you were exploited by the same infrastructure that manufactured your dominance. That is not a lawsuit. That is a tantrum with a case number. And frankly, it is one of the most tone-deaf legal filings I have seen in this industry in a decade. And listen, I am signed. I have signed contracts. My first deal as a producer was not remotely favorable, and it wasn't supposed to be. That is the trade. You give up publishing, you accept a smaller advance, you accept a longer term, and in exchange the label carries you to rooms you could not walk into alone. If you are lucky and you deliver a hit, the second deal gets better. The third deal gets even better. And if you become a global titan like Drake did, you eventually get to renegotiate on your own terms. But you do not sue backwards. You do not litigate your own genesis. That is what a person allergic to accountability does, and unfortunately, that word, accountability, is going to be the word of this entire video, so get comfortable with it, because we are going to be circling back to it more than once. Now let's talk about the Kendrick angle, because the Toronto loyalists have opened a new front in the disinformation war, and it is my job to shut it down before it metastasizes across every timeline in North America. The latest claim making the rounds is that Kendrick Lamar has been stealing terms, flows, and imagery from Drake, and the most recent example being trotted out is the word boogeyman, a term that has been used in hip-hop, in cinema, in folklore, and in your grandmother's ghost stories for actual centuries. Gucci Mane was calling himself the boogeyman 2 decades ago. The concept predates every artist involved in this conversation by hundreds of years. But the manufactured storyline is that Kendrick Lamar, an 11-time Grammy winner who just completed a generational run against Drake himself, is now, at the peak of his powers, jealous of the man he beat. Read that back slowly. It falls apart under a flashlight the moment you shine light on it. Kendrick is jealous of the artist Kendrick defeated in the most one-sided cultural blowout in modern rap. Sure, and I have a bridge in Brooklyn I would love to sell you. The peekaboo flow allegation is even more comical. The claim is that Kendrick lifted a specific delivery pattern from AZ Chike, who was a rival of the artist known as Draco, and therefore the entire cadence is a proxy diss aimed at Drake. Family, every flow in hip-hop is derivative. Every cadence is inspired by something. Rakim inspired Big Daddy Kane. Big inspired Jay. Jay inspired Wayne. Wayne inspired Drake. Drake inspired half of Atlanta. This is how the genre breathes. This is how the culture evolves. The idea that Kendrick Lamar, of all artists, is the one guy who is supposed to invent every syllable he raps in a total vacuum is a rule that gets applied to Kendrick and nobody else. And that alone should tell you the whole storyline is manufactured. It is a double standard so obvious it barely deserves a rebuttal, but here we are. Alright, let's talk about the second lawsuit story, because when I told you this behavior is a decade-old pattern, I wasn't exaggerating. I want you to travel with me back to the mid-2000s, when Aubrey Graham was still a working actor on Degrassi. The Next Generation, playing a character named Jimmy Brooks who, in a landmark storyline, was shot on school grounds and paralyzed from the waist down. That storyline was, at the time, praised for its honesty, its representation, and its refusal to sanitize a real tragedy. It gave voice to kids in wheelchairs who never saw themselves in a leading role. It was, by every reasonable metric, a good storyline. Except, according to a former Degrassi writer named James Hurst, Drake did not agree. Drake, or Aubrey as Drake was known then, allegedly had his legal team draft a letter to the production stating that he would not return for season 6 unless the character was healed and out of the wheelchair. Let me repeat that so it lands with the weight it deserves. A teenage actor, on a Canadian teen drama, had his lawyers threaten a production over a wheelchair. And when Hurst confronted Drake directly, according to the interview, Drake did what Drake historically does when he gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He denied it. He acted like the letter did not exist. He said, and I am paraphrasing here, that his friends in the rap game were calling him soft for playing a paralyzed character, and that he needed the storyline reversed so his budding career would not suffer. Hurst apparently laughed at Drake and said, Tell your friends in the rap game that your character got shot. Because how much tougher can you possibly get than surviving a school shooting on a scripted teen drama? And that story, family, is the entire Drake blueprint in one anecdote. Send the legal threat, deny the legal threat when questioned, and then quietly back down once you are exposed. It is textbook behavior. It is par for the course. And when you connect that anecdote to the current UMG lawsuit, the hip-hop lawsuit, and every other filing his team has attached its name to, you start to see the pattern. This is not a man victimized by his industry. This is a man who has weaponized litigation as a career strategy. And I want to be very careful here to say, I am not a lawyer. I am not making a legal finding, and everything I am describing is allegedly the case based on reporting from today, from People magazine, from AV Club, and from the direct statements of the people who lived it. But allegedly does not soften the pattern. The pattern is the pattern, and the pattern is embarrassing. Because when you have 10 different people from 10 different corners of the industry all describing the same behavior in the same terms, that is no longer a coincidence. That is a resume, and Drake is the one who wrote it. Now let's swing the camera back to the Jay-Z conversation, because this is where the internet has fully lost the plot. The Wireless Festival in London recently made news for two reasons. One, they canceled Kanye West's headlining appearance amid pressure from Roc Nation and other stakeholders. And two, they announced a Jay-Z anniversary run of stadium shows to fill the calendar. Now, is the timing dramatic? Absolutely. Is it suspicious? Only if you are already primed to see conspiracies where there are none. The reality is much simpler. Jay-Z is celebrating the 30th anniversary of one of the most important debut albums in rap history. Every arena is demanding Jay-Z. Every promoter is calling Jay-Z. And Wireless, being a major London festival with an empty headline slot, did what any smart business would do. They booked the biggest available legend on the calendar. That is not a conspiracy. That is capitalism doing what capitalism does. But the Toronto loyalists, unable to accept that Jay-Z has organic demand, have manufactured yet another storyline, which is that Roc Nation orchestrated the Kanye cancellation to clear the runway for HOV. And I will say this once and only once. Even if that were true, and I have seen zero credible evidence that it is, Kanye West has spent the past several years engaging in behavior that has independently caused sponsors, festivals, and platforms to distance themselves from him without any external pressure required. You do not need a Roc Nation shadow campaign to explain why a major London festival got cold feet about a headline slot for an artist whose recent public commentary has been, to put it charitably, extraordinarily divisive. The Occam's razor answer is the correct one. Wireless made a business decision. Jay-Z was the safer, more bankable, more universally beloved option. End of story. And every single person spinning the shadow campaign angle knows it too. They just cannot say it out loud because the storyline requires a villain, and Jay-Z is the convenient one this month. And speaking of numbers, let me hit you with the receipt that broke the internet this week. Jay-Z just hit a new all-time peak on Spotify with 47.2 million monthly listeners. Jay-Z has not released a studio album since 444, which came out in 2017. Read that again. A man who has not dropped a project in nearly a decade is currently sitting at his personal streaming peak, in a genre that supposedly moves on every 18 months, in an era that supposedly rewards only the most recently active artists. And Jay-Z is doing it while headlining stadiums. And Jay-Z is doing it while owning his entire publishing catalog. And Jay-Z is doing it while running a sports agency, a champagne label, a streaming platform, and a mentorship pipeline that has produced half the biggest artists of the past 2 decades. If that is what irrelevance looks like, I would like to file for irrelevance immediately, because it appears to pay extremely well. Now let me hit you with the number that is going to make the Toronto loyalists log off entirely. I pulled up the all-time pure album sales chart. Not streaming equivalents. Not padded numbers. Not bundle deals. Actual pure records sold. And the top 5 looks like this. Number 1, Eminem. Not surprising, the man is a monolith. Number 2, Tupac. Also not surprising, the greatest posthumous catalog in music history. Number 3, and I want you to sit down for this, Jay-Z. The same Jay-Z that the OVO faithful have spent the last month calling washed, dusty, obsolete, and irrelevant. Number 4, Kanye West. Also historically massive. And number 5, Drake. trailing Jay-Z by more than 10 million pure records sold. So the artist who supposedly cannot compete with Drake is, in fact, above Drake on the most stringent measurement of album performance that exists. And this is not with the error-adjusted advantage of streaming. This is old-fashioned, walk into a Best Buy and buy CD sales. This is people opening their wallets and physically handing over money for a plastic disc. And here is the part that really breaks the storyline. Jay-Z accomplished those sales in an era when you had to physically go to a store and pay real money for the record. Drake accomplished his in the era of infinite streams, playlist real estate, and bundle with a hoodie deals. So when you adjust for the difficulty of each era, the gap gets embarrassing. That is not slander. That is math. And math, unlike a manufactured storyline, does not care about your feelings. It also does not care about what OVO wants the timeline to look like. The numbers are the numbers. The receipts are the receipts. And the receipts, unfortunately for Drake, are not on his side. Now let's swing back to the lawsuit itself for a moment, because I want to make one more observation that I think is going to land with everybody who has ever signed a contract in their life. When you sign a management deal, especially your first, you have every opportunity to bring in outside counsel. If you cannot afford outside counsel, you have every opportunity to negotiate a payment plan with a lawyer who will happily review your paperwork in exchange for a small piece of your advance or an hourly rate deferred until you break. If you do not do that, if you sign under the same lawyers and same manager that the label uses, you have knowingly walked into a conflict of interest. That is not the manager's fault. That is your fault. And every producer, every engineer, every songwriter, every artist watching this video who has ever signed a deal knows exactly what I am talking about. This is Business 101. And Drake, who has spent a decade positioning himself as one of the most business-savvy artists of his generation, does not get to pretend he did not know. Nobody is buying it. Not the industry veterans. Not the fans. Not the courts, if this ever actually reaches a courtroom. I want to walk through some of the top comments on the hip-hop interview clip, because the reactions have been, for lack of a better word, ruthless. One comment read simply, quote, "This man had to split his check with 5 people before he even dropped a debut album, and he wants to sue the guy who helped him. That is peak entitlement." End quote. Another one, and this one I laughed at physically, read quote, "Drake, at some point you have to play the cards you were dealt instead of suing the dealer." End quote. And a third one, which I think summarizes the entire cultural moment, read quote, "First he sued Kendrick, then he sued Universal, then he sued Wireless, then he sued hip-hop. What's next? Is he going to sue his own reflection?" End quote. Drop your own take in the comments below, because I want to hear which one is your favorite, and I am absolutely reading them all before I record the follow-up. And let's touch on something else that has been circulating, which is the claim that Kendrick offered, during the Euphoria diss, to compare their publishing splits publicly, and Drake refused. Now I cannot fact-check that offer with a signed contract in front of me, but the sentiment behind it makes sense in context. If your entire branding is that you are the biggest, richest, most self-made star in the game, you should have no problem showing the paperwork. But if your paperwork is actually a 5-way split before UMG takes its cut, you're going to be considerably more shy about publicizing it. And that reluctance, family, tells its own story. Silence, in this industry, is almost always a form of confession. And Drake has been very, very quiet on that particular front. Now I want to give you a little industry insider perspective, because I have watched too many young artists sign the exact same trap that Drake signed, and then spend the next decade of their career complaining about it. Here is the truth. When a label gives you a big advance, they are not gifting you money. They are lending you money against your own future royalties. Every dollar of that advance is going to be recouped out of the royalties you would otherwise earn. So if your album makes $10 million in royalties and your advance was $2 million, you don't see a royalty check until the label has clawed back the entire $2 million plus interest plus expenses. And by the time all the co-managers, co-publishers, and label partners take their cuts, the artist is often left with a fraction of what the public assumes they earned. That is not a scandal. That is the standard model. And every artist who signs it knows the model going in, or should know it. And if they don't know it, that is a failure of their own preparation, not a crime committed by the label. So when Drake, 20 years into his career, decides to litigate the fact that he signed the standard model, what Drake is actually doing is admitting one of two things. Either Drake did not understand the paperwork he signed, which is a failure of Drake's own competence, or Drake did understand it, and now he is regretful, which is a failure of Drake's own accountability. Neither of those failures is hip-hop's fault. Neither of them is Universal's fault. Neither of them is Kendrick's fault. They are Drake's. Full stop. Every single one of them. And if Drake wants to spend the next chapter of his career filing paperwork about the paperwork he already signed, that is his prerogative, but he is going to lose that battle in the court of public opinion long before he loses it in a courtroom. And the reason I keep coming back to the word accountability is because that is the through line of every controversy this man has generated in the past 2 years. Drake blamed Kendrick for the beef. Drake blamed Universal for the promotion. Drake blamed his old manager for the deal. Drake blamed the Degrassi writers for the wheelchair. Drake blamed Spotify for streaming discrepancies. Drake blamed radio for airplay. Drake blamed the industry for the sales. Drake blamed the media for the narrative. At what point does Drake look in the mirror and blame the guy in the mirror? Because from where I am sitting, family, that is the only person in this entire storyline who has been present at every single alleged crime scene. And I do mean every single one. Let's take a beat and talk about Kanye for a second, because I do not want to leave that thread hanging. I am a fan of a lot of Kanye's music. Late Registration is one of the greatest albums of the century. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is a masterwork, and I acknowledge the artistic brilliance completely separately from the personal decisions that have made him a divisive public figure. But we cannot pretend that Kanye has not, through his own repeated public statements, given festival organizers and sponsors legitimate reasons to distance themselves. That is his own accountability moment. And the fact that his fanbase and Drake's fanbase have merged into a single anti-Jay-Z coalition, blaming everyone but the artists themselves, is one of the most predictable outcomes I have seen in a long time. Misery loves company. And apparently, so does a manufactured storyline. There is a lesson in there somewhere, but I doubt the coalition wants to hear it. Alright, one more layer, because I want to leave you with the receipts that will make the follow-up video from the Toronto Loyalists absolutely mandatory viewing. Jay-Z is currently the highest charting hip-hop artist on the anniversary charts. His wireless run is projected to gross north of 9 figures. His publishing empire, which he owns outright, is valued in the hundreds of millions. His champagne label, Armand de Brignac, sold a majority stake to Moët Hennessy for roughly $600 million. His streaming platform, Tidal, was sold to Square, now Block, for a reported $300 million. His sports agency, Roc Nation Sports, represents some of the biggest athletes on the planet. His entertainment company, Roc Nation, produced the Super Bowl halftime show for 4 consecutive years. And through it all, Jay-Z has quietly become the first hip-hop artist to cross the billion-dollar net worth threshold, a milestone that Drake has publicly aspired to and, according to the paperwork hip-hop just described, may be considerably further from than his fanbase wants to admit. That is not a diss. That is the resume. And a resume does not care about your emotions. Now I want to close with a message directly to any young artist watching this video. And this is coming from someone who has signed paperwork, someone who has read paperwork, and someone who has watched dozens of friends sign paperwork they did not fully understand. Number 1, get your own attorney. Even if you cannot afford one up front, most entertainment lawyers will work on deferred payment or a small piece of the advance. Do not use the same attorney as the label. Do not use the same attorney as the manager. Do not use the same attorney as anybody on the other side of the negotiation table. That is a conflict of interest, and it will cost you your career. Number 2, read every single line of the paperwork. Every clause, every option year, every recoupment provision, every publishing split. If you do not understand a clause, ask. If they will not explain, walk. Number 3, and this is the most important one, accept that your first deal is going to be worse than you want it to be. It is supposed to be. It is the trade. The label is taking a risk on you. You are taking a risk on yourself. Nobody is being victimized. This is a business transaction. And if the business does not work, that is on you, not the counterparty. Because at some point, family, the excuses run out. At some point, the paperwork you signed is the paperwork you signed. At some point, you have to look at the deal, look at the money it made you, look at the career it built you, and accept that trading a slice of the pie for a seat at the biggest table in the game was actually a pretty reasonable deal. Or you can spend the rest of your career as Drake appears to be doing, filing motion after motion against the people who built the pie in the first place. Your call. And I want to zoom out for a second and talk about what this moment actually means for the broader hip-hop ecosystem, because there is a bigger picture here that I do not want to lose in the noise. When the biggest artist of the streaming era spends his post-beef chapter filing paperwork instead of dropping music, that is a signal about where his creative confidence is. When the second biggest cultural figure of the streaming era, meaning Kendrick Lamar, spends his post-beef chapter breaking touring records, winning Super Bowl halftime slots, and dominating year-end lists, that is also a signal. And when the elder statesman of the entire genre, meaning Jay-Z, spends his post-beef chapter selling out stadiums for an album that turned 30 this year, that is the loudest signal of all. The three artists at the top of this conversation have taken three very different paths post-2024, and only one of them has taken the litigation path. That should tell you everything. Because if the paperwork Drake signed 20 years ago was truly the injustice his current lawsuit implies, then every artist in the industry who signed comparable paperwork over the same time period would also be filing motions. And they are not. Wayne is not. Kanye, whatever else you want to say about him, is not filing on his old paperwork. Nicki is not. Rihanna is not. J. Cole is not. Kendrick is not. The industry is full of artists who signed rough first deals, made peace with the trade-off, renegotiated when they had leverage, and moved on with their careers. Drake is the outlier, not the victim. And let's talk about the timing for a moment, because timing is always the tell. Drake is not filing these lawsuits from a position of strength. Drake is filing these lawsuits after losing the biggest cultural battle of his career in the most public way possible. Drake is filing these lawsuits after watching his primary rival, Kendrick, run away with the year in a way that no post-beef album from Drake has been able to reverse. Drake is filing these lawsuits after watching Kendrick perform at the Super Bowl. Drake is filing these lawsuits after watching Kendrick sweep the Grammys. Drake is filing these lawsuits after watching Not Like Us become the most inescapable song of the year. That is not the timing of a confident artist rewriting his legacy. That is the timing of a wounded competitor searching for anywhere, any courtroom, any judge, any process that might reframe the story in his favor. And this is where I have to give Kendrick Lamar his flowers directly, because Kendrick has done something remarkable in the 12 months since the beef ended. Kendrick has said almost nothing. Kendrick has posted almost nothing. Kendrick has explained almost nothing. Kendrick has simply kept working, kept touring, kept collecting trophies, and kept letting the music do the arguing. That, by the way, is exactly what Jay-Z does. That is exactly what the best artists in this genre have always done. You let the work talk. You let the numbers talk. You let the culture decide. What you do not do, and this is critical, is spend the next chapter of your career filing paperwork about the last chapter. Now let me address a specific claim that has been making the rounds, which is that Kendrick's silence is evidence that he has nothing else to say. That is one of the most historically illiterate takes I have seen this year. Kendrick Lamar's entire catalog is built on silence between albums. Kendrick took 5 years between Damn and Mr. Morale. Kendrick took 3 years between Mr. Morale and GNX. Kendrick's rollout cadence is measured in geological time, not TikTok cycles. So when the Toronto loyalists tell you Kendrick is silent because he has nothing left, what they are actually revealing is that they have never studied his catalog. They are projecting Drake's constant drop panic onto an artist whose entire brand is patience. It is embarrassing, and it is telling. And let's compare release cadences for a second, because this comparison alone tells the whole story. Since 2022, Drake has released, and I want you to count with me here, Honestly Nevermind, Her Loss, For All the Dogs, Scary Hours Edition, 100 gigs, and Now Iceman is Looming. That is 6 pieces of content in 3 years. 6. In the same window, Kendrick released Mr. Morale, then went quiet, then dropped Not Like Us, Meet the Grams, Euphoria, and 616 in LA as diss records, then released GNX at the end of 2024. Now count which of those releases is dominating year-end conversation. Count which of those releases is being played at every wedding, every barbecue, every sporting event in America. Count which of those artists is headlining the Super Bowl. Volume does not equal impact. And Drake, more than any artist of his generation, has confused output for artistry. That is the diagnosis. That is why the lawsuits keep coming. Because when the music stops working, when the streaming numbers stop translating into cultural relevance, when the album drops stop generating the fever they used to generate, an artist has two choices. They can go back to the studio and make something undeniable, or they can go to the courthouse and try to relitigate the story. And Drake, so far, has chosen the courthouse. That is his prerogative, but it is also a confession. Let me read one more comment, because this one perfectly captures the moment. A user wrote, quote, "Imagine spending 3 years telling the world you are the biggest artist alive, then turning around and suing the people who made you the biggest artist alive. That is not villain arc energy. That is confused child energy." End quote. And listen, that comment might be harsh, but it is also completely accurate. When your entire brand is built on invincibility and self-madeness, filing a paperwork-based grievance against the people who literally built your machine is a brand-shattering move. It is not just legally weak. It is narratively weak. It undermines the myth Drake has spent 2 decades constructing. And that, family, is why I keep telling you this beef never really ended. It just changed venues. It went from the booth to the courtroom. It went from bars to briefs. And in every venue Drake has chosen since Not Like Us dropped, the results have gotten worse for him. He tried to spin the beef as a draw. It was not. He tried to spin the streaming numbers as a comeback. They were not. He tried to spin Not Like Us as a bot-driven anomaly. It was not. And now he is trying to spin his own paperwork as a fraud committed against him. It is not. At some point, the pattern becomes the story. And the pattern here is very, very clear. And I want to hit one more angle before I let you go, because I think this one gets under-discussed. The hip-hop interview did not happen in a vacuum. It happened after months of Drake's team leaking selective narratives about who wronged him, who owes him, who profited from him. And hip-hop, being the veteran he is, waited until the timing was right, and then calmly walked into a camera and dismantled the entire premise in under 10 minutes. That is what a real industry adult does. That is what accountability sounds like when it comes from somebody who actually earned their stripes. Hip-hop did not raise his voice. Hip-hop did not name-call. Hip-hop simply stated the paperwork, stated the timeline, and stated the outcome. And the outcome, family, is that Drake made hundreds of millions of dollars off a deal he now claims was predatory. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot flex the yacht and simultaneously sue the boat builder. That is the entire lesson of this news cycle, wrapped in a bow, delivered by a man who has watched Drake grow up in this business. And honestly, the most damning part is how quiet Drake's inner circle has been while this story unfolds. Where is OVO? Where is Chubbs? Where is 40? Where is the OVO sound machine that used to circle wagons every time Drake caught a bad news day? Silent. Radio silent. And silence, in a moment like this, is not neutrality. Silence is a verdict. When the people closest to you refuse to defend the position publicly, they are telling you the position is indefensible. That is the industry code. That is how these things always end. Drake is fighting this one alone, and the courtroom, unlike the timeline, does not accept vibes as evidence. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think Drake has any real chance in this suit against hip-hop? Do you think the Degrassi wheelchair story tells us everything we need to know about his pattern? Do you think Jay-Z's wireless run silences the irrelevant storyline for good? And do you think Kendrick Lamar is stealing terms? Or is that just the latest manufactured storyline the loyalists have cooked up to explain a beef they have already lost? I want to hear all of it, the good, the bad, and the unhinged, because I already know the comments are going to be a roller coaster. And I read them. I promise you I read them. Every single one. Massive appreciation to everybody who has been rocking with the channel this year. It has been an absolutely wild ride, and the fact that you keep coming back day after day means more than I can put into words. Huge shout out to everybody who has been jumping on the memberships, and a bigger shout out to everybody who has been sending in the super thanks, because that support keeps the lights on and the mic hot. If you want more of these breakdowns, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and follow me on X for the between video threads. The link is pinned right below this video, along with the tip line for any news drops, video ideas, or lawsuit filings you want me to cover next. Because between us, the way this year is going, we are going to be filing plenty more of those breakdowns before the calendar flips. And I am never surprised, not even a little, when I hear Drake and lawsuit used in the same sentence. Because at this point, family, that pairing is not a coincidence. It is a brand. Catch you on the next one.